So I was a bit concerned, whether I remember I asked you, are we going to sit down or stand up? Do you remember? And I didn't know whether we're going to sit down or stand up. And normally if I sit down or stand up, actually people don't know the difference. So I'm actually really glad that this is up here and I feel about the normal height of a human being. So this is all very good so far. Thank you so much for doing this and putting this on, and sorry to interrupt your eating of your cake. It's truly amazing work that you do and such a fantastic organization, and privileged to be here and be a part of it. Thank you. So maybe I wind back the clock about a decade, or maybe just a few years before that, 4 years before 2016, not 2016, 2005, actually. So 2005, I don't know how it happened. I really don't know how it happened. People made some serious mistakes, and somehow I found myself as the youngest director in our firm, and a few years later I found myself making partner, and I was thinking, again, they made a mistake. And I remember the first years I was sitting there, and honestly, we had these groups where the head of the business used to gather us round 11 years ago and say, I know being a partner at the beginning is really hard and there's huge pressure on you and you work in the biggest global professional services firm and our clients are hugely demanding. And I used to sit there and think, what the fuck are you all talking about? This is so easy. So in 2009, as the start says, I was arrogant. I was young, privileged, affluent, a failed perfectionist, and life just seemed really, really easy. And then it was 2013, and in 2013, some really usual things happened to me. Nothing that's going to seem terribly unremarkable to anyone in the audience. I mean, some of them were quite sad, like, my brother-in-law got divorced, and my kids were growing up and they started to be a little bit of a pain in the arse, and we didn't really know how to deal with them properly. And then I hired my fourth partner into the business that I'd founded, and that didn't go so well, and there was kind of tensions, but stuff happens. And then one of my major clients went bankrupt. One of their portfolio companies, their companies they owned, went bankrupt, and they owed us $1.5 million, and I kind of took that a bit personally. But I just thought, this is just, I'll just try harder. I'll push more. I'll be cleverer. I'll think it through. I'll work harder. I'll push more. I'll think it through. It'll be fine. And then in 2013, slowly things started to almost imperceptibly decline. But I didn't know what was going on. And I remember one meeting. I was out in Holland, and I was seeing the CFO of this business, and I didn't know what it was. I mean, now I can tell you it was a minor panic attack, but my sort of chest started to fizz a bit in the meeting. I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but I ignored it and I carried on and I pushed harder. And then in end of 2013, I had one lovely wife. I actually still have one lovely wife. It's the same lovely wife. She's sitting just here.
I wondered why you said that.
I saw a disconcerted look in her eyes as I said that, and I was thinking, I just better clarify. And my lovely wife and I and our lovely 4 kids were in Disney. What could be greater privilege than to be in Disney in Florida? And I was walking around, and I had this gnawing, anxious feeling. I didn't know what anxiety was, but I had this gnawing feeling in the back of my head. It was almost felt a bit physical, and I couldn't escape it, and I didn't know really what was going on. And I remember this one time we were sitting there, and I looked over there, and we were watching some crazy Disney kind of production. And sitting opposite me, way on the other side, was a young man who was in a wheelchair and clearly severely disabled. He had some sort of ventilator, and he was smiling. And I remember looking at him and thinking, why can't I be happy? This is mad. He's happy, he's smiling, and I can't be happy. But I couldn't be happy. And then we went to the airport, and you remember this, I burst out crying with Corinne, and I said, I don't know what's happening, but I can't deal with it. And our kids were all around us, and they saw me crying, and there's not many places to hide 4 kids in an airport, so it was pretty public. And then we got on the plane, and all night we just talked about it and cried and talked about it and cried. And in the morning I went to see the doctor, and he said, hey, it happens to people like you, just take this. And he gave me sertraline, which, by the way, I'm sure many of you know, is a perfectly reasonable first-line response. But for some reason or another, the sertraline really didn't work for me, and many of you will know there's a curve as you get onto this medication, but for me, I had a very severe reaction to the medication. And there began what my kids affectionately call the Great Depression. And it was wicked, and it was horrible, and it went on for a long time. Maybe it went on for 2 years, and there were times where I didn't sleep for, I don't know, if I was lucky, maybe 1.5 hours a night. And I started getting these strange electric impulse feelings down my side of my body and the side of my face. And I was paranoid, literally, to the extent I was walking down the road and I actually thought people were wanting to do something to me. And I started really not being able to, it was really horrific because given the arrogant start that I told you about, I was sitting at work and I couldn't process a basic email. I phoned Corinne and burst out crying because this was not a complicated email. It was something about how you use the toilets, I think, and I just couldn't understand it. And every day felt inconquerable. How can I get to the end of today? It almost felt like the light was narrowing and there was no light, and I couldn't even really see to the end of the tunnel. And somehow, I really looking back on it, don't know where the depths of human resilience comes from that allowed me to get through those times, because it went on for day and week and months and years. And there are 2 moments I'll just share with you. One moment, one was more shocking, but one was more saddening. This moment, I was driving at the bottom of where we live. There's a quadrant and some traffic lights, and I was driving through to come home, and the pain was just too much. And I came to the traffic lights, and they turned red as I was approaching, and I saw cars and a lorry coming the other way, and I just thought, fuck it. And I put my foot on the accelerator. And the car accelerated into the traffic lights, and I don't know what it was because it wasn't me, but something just took me over, and I slammed on the brake and ABS kicked in and the car shuddered and I came to a stop just in time. And I didn't die. I guess that bit's obvious. And then this more saddening one was I was sitting there and I went in to my youngest child. We have 3 boys and a girl, and my youngest child was maybe 7 at the time, I would guess, and I tried to just be with her for a few minutes before she went to bed. And I'll never forget this moment. She looked me in the eyes and she said to me, and I was sure no one knew what was going on, and she said to me, "Daddy, why are you always so sad?" And I didn't know what to do. Anyway, life's good now. So I'm happy to discuss the ins and outs of how the journey went and why life became good. And actually today, I find myself most days in a sense of flow. Perhaps that means something to most people in the audience. If it doesn't, it's a good thing. There's still echoes of the past, and that past, those echoes are sometimes really strong, and there's sometimes lapses, which I have to be really careful about. And you're never going to believe this when I say this with humility, given everything I've told you so far. But with humility, I really think that it's changed my impact as a leader in the job that I do, an ability to connect to my people. Instead of telling you more about the journey, I would love to just share with you my system, if that's okay. It's actually going to be quite similar to some stuff you've heard, but I've built an 8-pronged system. So I'll just go through my 8 prongs. And I think they're pretty good because they work for me, but that doesn't mean they work for everyone else. But one thing that's good about them is I think they're all quite well-researched, scientifically robust. In fact, I was with my psychiatrist, this isn't the beginning of a joke, just last week. And in fact, the last time I saw him, he said to me, the time before last, he looked at me and he was saying, like, how you are, and I told him how things were going and what was happening at work, and he just looked at me blank-faced and he said, do you think that perhaps your perfectionist tendencies have outlived their useful life? So I thought that was great. But anyway, time before, we were, let me go through them. Number 1, are you serious? I start here because it's a tough one, actually. I spend a lot of time with other leaders now in our firm who are demonstrably starting to struggle, and it really breaks my heart how people aren't serious about this. Imagine if I just asked you to do this one thing. Hold in your mind for one moment a pie chart that says on it, what are the most important value-based things in your life? Can you do that for me? If you could imagine creating another pie chart, which is just a very basic analysis of where you spend your time, and bring those two things together, put them on top of one another. But do you have a system? Do you have an integrated system? Do we understand what our systems are? And do we keep to it as if our life depends on it? Because actually, I think it does. And the other 7 branches look a little bit like this. One, and I'm a little bit, I said I'm struggling with perfectionism, so I'm a bit anal about all this stuff. But the first thing is diet, and the diet, although I'm fat, the diet is, that's all my kids say, but anyway, the diet is like really, really strict. So it's about high fat, high protein, low carb, pretty much no alcohol, lots of water. The second one is the exercise. From the stuff I read, the studies basically say if you get there 3 times a week and you're holding your heart rate at somewhere between 70 and 85% of its maximum, and maybe you're doing 1 weight session a week in addition, then that's good stuff. So I really try and do that. Thirdly, sleep. We live in this crazy world, this digital world, which is never ending and oppressive. But sleep's really important to me, so I try and make sure that, like, just I have a working week, I've got a sleeping week. So my sleeping week is 50 hours. And I try not to make that all on one day. Some of you realize the irony of that. So sleep, disciplined, try to be the same time of night, wake up at the same time in the morning. Those are the 3 physiological aspects of the system. The 4 more psychological aspects of the system that work for me is 1, I would describe it as purposeful relationship-based growth. So purposeful and relationship-based growth. And for me, that means a more healthy attitude towards hierarchy and status. It means a creative pursuit of something that's meaningful to us, particularly in the workplace. It means investing in relationships and moments that count, particularly with people that it's easy to be transactional about. Next is healthier work habits. I had terrible work habits. So I'll tell you a little bit about my work habits now. One day a week, nothing. no work. It's really easy because I'm a religious Jew, so I can't do it. But 1 day a week, from Friday night to before sunset to Saturday night, not an ounce of work, not an iPhone, nothing. But I don't think it's about being a religious Jew. I think we all need it. Secondly, work hours. My day used to not really start or not really end. It just was endless. Now I never look at my emails before I cycle to work if I'm in the office, otherwise if I'm traveling, I never look at my emails before I get to work. And now, do you know what? Suddenly I love looking at them rather than it being a horror. I never look at my emails on my smartphone after 9 o'clock at night. I'm absolutely rigorous about how much time there is in the diary to think and to be creative and innovative and do the stuff that I needed to do to be a leader. So healthy work habits. Next is mindfulness and meditation practice. So I've been doing this for 6 years now, and it's the first thing I do every single day, no matter what happens. It's non-negotiable. 30 minutes, silent meditation, focusing on the qualities of heart and mind that meditation is meant to bring out. In particular, non-striving, letting go, patience, gratitude, loving kindness. I think these things are things that we're not really that good at in the Western world, and I was really bad at. I just want to share one quick anecdote from the Dalai Lama. I love this one from one of his books. He was talking when he first came into the Western world. He was talking to a group of mental health practitioners and executive coaches. And he was talking about the way the mind functions, and he stopped and asked for questions. And someone said, you know, a lot of the people we work with, actually what we understand is as we get to know them better, there's kind of an anxiety underneath the surface. As we really understand our clients better, there may be even, you might call it a self-loathing. And when you see that, how do you deal with it? And he turned around to his Tibetan monks and they chatted for a while. No one knew what they were saying because they were talking in Tibetan. And then he turned back and he said, "Sorry, I don't understand the question. I can't answer you." And then years later, after he'd been exposed to the Western world for over a decade, he came back to that question. He said, "Now I understand what you were asking." But I think that says something about the way our minds are conditioned. So anyway, that's mindfulness. And then lastly, and it echoes again what you guys were saying earlier, but just a lifelong commitment to learning. There's so much to learn. There's so much good stuff. There's so many good books. There's so many good TED Talks. There's so many wise people. It's so easy to access it. So that's the system that really has helped me a lot to, well, first of all, survive in the first instance, and then subsequently maybe even make an attempt at thriving. I want to just do two other things. One is share with you a tiny perspective what we're doing at PwC, because maybe someone asked the question about organizations before. Lots of people are doing amazing stuff. We've heard some amazing stuff today, but the stuff I'm most proud of is we have 26 mental health partner advocates. So those are partner leaders in our firm that put themselves out as mental health advocates, connect with people, tell their stories, and are there to just be talked to, listened with, shared. Secondly, we trained every one of our HR leaders and our people partners in mental health first aid, which was a huge, huge help to recognizing the signs of mental health, ill health, or mental ill health in the workforce. Thirdly, it's so good to say that every single one of our, in the UK, 22,000 people and 250,000 people globally have access to the right kind of private medical health insurance that includes full mental health cover. And we started I love what you're doing, we started a This Is My Story campaign in 2016. And every month someone tells their story, and we're full up to the end of 2020. And that includes people speaking out on things that are still taboo, you know, not just mental health, but the impact of mental health in certain religious communities, the impact of mental health in certain cultural settings, which I think are even more difficult than some of what we struggle with in the city. So the last thing is just for me what the so whats are. I guess my so whats are talk, 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 and seek help early. And I just wished I'd sought help a bit earlier because it would have been a lot less painful. That's one. Two is if we can create systems for each of us that we're serious about and that work and that we really dedicate our lives to, I think the world will change and be a much better place. Three, and probably lastly, I really love the fact that we're talking about mental ill health, but I actually think that there's a much, much bigger or even as big a story on the impact of mental health and well-being in our workforce. I have experienced, but see in our people, the spectrum between, if we were athletes, we talk about the spectrum between people who have had a terrible injury and therefore cannot compete in the 400 meters final, and people who are winning the gold medals. And I think that to some extent, our mental health spectrum is too stunted. And particularly on the latter half of that spectrum, the release of energy and creativity, not to say anything about the release of loving kindness, gratitude, generosity, and health in the community, would be massively, massively more powerful with all of that. So thank you so much for listening to me.